Who is the most baddest person you also have ever met? I was on a train listening to music. I may have had the volume up a bit too high and some music may have leaked out from my earphones. This old lady, 60s 70s, who was sitting across from me all of a sudden started screaming at me at the top of her lungs. She sounded batshit crazy, so I don't remember what she said, but it was probably something along the lines of no respect for others. Blah blah blah. Everyone else in the train is looking around awkwardly and some are looking at me sympathetically, but what can you do? Suddenly this man, even older than the crazy lady, stands up and looks straight at the woman saying, "You shut your mouth." This is why younger people don't trust or respect their elders anymore. That shut the lady up and she got off at the next stop. The old man looks over at me, smiles really kindly and says, "Maybe your music was a bit loud. But that's okay. Don't let it bother you." That guy was my hero. Met an older man bartending between school sessions. He was very quiet and polite. He never bothered anyone. One night, a group of National Guardsmen came into the bar pretty fresh off of a deployment to Afghanistan. My friend was from Israel and had a very thick accent. One of the bigger dudes got in his face and started talking shit. He made the mistake of extending a finger into this 65+ old man's chest. I then saw him cringe in pain and hit the floor. My buddy managed to break his finger, wrist, and arm without me even seeing the fight. He was a retired Mossad agent. I will never underestimate a person because of their age for as long as I live. I work for my state's SOS parole board and every 2 years we see this woman who, in all honesty, should be dead. The couple who kidnapped her ended up stabbing her many times after they both raped her. They left her in a ditch, came back later and stabbed her some more just to make sure she was dead. She regained consciousness and walked to the nearest gas station. Now she comes to oppose parole every single time she's eligible for it. Hearing her talk about the incident is riveting and awful. I don't know how she does it every 2 years. But she wants to protect other people who might become victims if she's released. My uncle is the only survivor of the squad he commanded in Afghanistan. Not a single one of them died in combat. But everyone except for him killed themselves after returning home. He wasn't functional in public spaces for years after the fact due to PTSD. And his wife couldn't take the stress and divorced him. The fact that he's still alive is a miracle. The fact that he's happily married, perfectly functional in public, and makes unreasonably good money etching barrels is just a testament to the dude's willpower. Not a person, but this ginger cat that wandered down our drive one day. One eye missing. What seemed like half of his brain exposed. Gashes everywhere. Just skin and bones. We fixed him up and named him Butters. He guarded our house with his life and would take on any dog, coyote, anything that tried to come up. He once fell asleep on a visitor's car and clung for dear life a couple miles down the road until our friend realized he had this chunky ass cat sprawled out like a starfish on his back window. My dad. He served in Vietnam as a Marine. Was discharged with a Purple Heart. Then joined the Navy and became a flight surgeon. He could fly F-18s. And perform surgery, not at the same time. After his military career, he became an emergency room surgeon. Always saving lives. He passed in 2013 due to dementia. And left us way too young. Jesus, my absolute hero and hands down the most baddest person I've ever met. I know it's kinda cheesy. But I was going to say my dad as well. Army vet. All around tough guy. He got into a pretty bad car accident in '87. The car flipped. Anyway, around 2012 he started experiencing numbness in his fingers. He went in for x-rays and it turns out he broke one of his cervical vertebrae. And was walking around with a broken neck for 25 years. That's the type of guy he is. The vertebrae had healed but some bone fragments were making contact with his spinal cord, causing the numbness. Dad has been gone for almost 30 years now. I remember working in the garage with him one day. He was working on a V8 engine block on the bench and needed to move it to the other end of the bench. He grabbed it with 2 arms and started to the other end of the bench. The block slipped out of his grasp and landed on his foot. He did not flinch. He picked it up and placed it on the bench and kept working. At the time I was 6'4" and 235 pounds. I knew then I was never going to mess with him. Your dad is Terminator. I feel like I met a lot of badasses when I worked at Apple. Shocking. I know. But we weren't all nerds. But Don was by far the most badass. When I left he was 82 years old and sharp as a tack. He kept up with the breakneck pace of the genius bar appointments with the best of us. He lived on a mountain and every morning Hassad run to the summit. He climbed Mt. Baldy at 79 without breaking a sweat. He was a classically trained opera singer, an orchestra conductor, and a music professor at a local college. He spoke fluent German and Spanish. I think he went to seminary school at some point too. He was definitely a pastor at his church. He was all around an incredible guy with an awesome life story. I might never work with anyone like him again. Had this thing at school where I met an old man. This was back in early 2000s. I was talking to a group of people like most 16-year-olds do. I talked about how school sucked and it's hard to compete with everyone. Old man tells me to count my lucky stars for my opportunity. I kind of blow it off. 30 minutes later I'm in the auditorium to hear a guest speaker. The old man gets on stage and tells his story. His name was Walter Weiner and he was a Polish Holocaust survivor. When he was my age he was held in Buchenwald. He told several stories about how he had planned to charge the gates so they would kill him. A couple about being in line to be executed and feeling relieved. After he told his story I realized uncomfortably exactly what he meant when he said I should count my lucky stars for the opportunity. He was badass because he was ready to die from the pressure he was under but chose to keep going. He pushed through and on the other side of that tragedy. He had a family, a home and a life of constant gratitude. I came back from a deployment and got out of the military. I lost a big part of my identity and was in a deep depression. When it got down to the darkest points I thought about Walter and how happy he was. My dad. Till the day he passed away from cancer. Served in both the Israeli and Russian army, obviously different time periods. Moved to the United States with my mom to start a new life with my family for the rest of his life, for 35 years in the US, and everything about him was badass. I had these bullies in high school who picked on me, private all boys school, and they just wouldn't stop and the teachers and no one else did nothing about it either. And one day instead of my mom picking me up from school, my dad picked me up. He saw that I was upset and I broke down crying because I couldn't take the torment I was taking from these bullies anymore. So my dad asked where they were. And I pointed outside the car and he yelled for their names and I don't know what he said to them. He didn't hit them obviously. But it was enough to have them stop picking on me for the rest of high school. My dad was my hero that day and forever, and that exudes such a level of badass and respect from me that day. My dad was tough and strong till the day he passed away. I'll never forget how strong he was even on his deathbed. But he left such an impact on my life that no other person ever could. That's why he was so badass to me. My mom. She grew up in China with her parents and sister living in basically one room. She had to attend night school where everyone told her she would never make it to college. She did and went on to win awards as an architect. She then married my father and moved to the States, where she worked years as a waitress while my dad went to school. Then my dad was killed by a drunk driver. She had 6 months to be remarried or we had to leave America. She decided she wanted to stay here for me. Because by then my Chinese lacked very badly. I moved here when I was 5. Somehow she found an amazing man who knew our situation and helped us in every bit he could. Then my stepdad got diagnosed with a disease called PSP, where basically he slowly loses every single function he has. These days my mom spends her time turning him in bed every 2 hours to avoid pressure sores, feeding him through his feeding tube, cleaning his incontinence, giving him daily bed baths, all with as much love as the first time they met. She also works a full-time job as an AutoCAD designer while maintaining an amazing backyard garden, while also keeping up with her own gallery and art. She gets around 4-5 hours of sleep every single night. Yet somehow every time I see her she has a huge smile on her face and is very energetic and cheerful. I don't know how she does it, but she gives me hope to be an amazing person as she is. Guy fought with the Polish underground during World War II. Went on the toughest deals, got captured 3 times and sent to prison camp. Escaped 3 times. Got captured again just before the liberation, killed one of the guards and put on the guard's uniform. Because the Russians were liberating the Polish prisoners. And the British were taking charge of the German guards. Later gets it sorted out that he's Polish. And would have been killed if left to the Russians. Gets sent to London and emigrates to US. Trained as a nurse. He was the most unprepossessing tough guy ever. But he was a tough guy. Glad I knew him. I've been thinking about this question all day, so I had to post it. Anyways. I'd say the most badass person I ever met was this absolute mad lad German guy in Namibia. My friends and I booked a desert tour of the Namib with him. He picked us up in a World War II German ambulance and rolled us on over to the desert. He decided he wanted to show us a snake. This guy slows down the ambulance. Leaves it running and doesn't even put it in park. And just jumps the fuck out and sticks his whole hand into a bush but doesn't find a snake. He did this a few more times before he just pulled out a fucking pit viper and shows it to us. Then proceeds to tell us never stick your hand in a bush. He then started driving up and down the sand dunes not giving a fuck. I swear we were at one point going down at a 90-degree angle. The guy was slightly nuts, but I had a lot of fun and learned a lot from him. I once watched Junior so defuse a situation where a drunk dude just wouldn't stop badgering this girl and his crew. Dude wasn't handsy or anything. Just kept following them around. Constantly inserting himself into their fun. And all the while just constantly hitting on this lady. Junior finally stood up from the blackjack table. Cracked his neck. Picked the dude up by the belt and the scruff of his neck. Carried him 10 feet away and said something to him quietly before setting him down. Junior went back to playing blackjack and dude bugged right the fuck off. Annoying dude was actually pretty big. Junior picked him up like a toddler. My Uncle Woody, big Native American. Fought with the 164th North Dakota National Guard Infantry on Guadalcanal and WWII. Sent to reinforce the 1st Marine Division. At first the seasoned Marines had their doubts about them. But after the Japanese were defeated at Guadalcanal, they referred to them as the 164th Marines. He was wounded and decorated for his actions there. After WWII he volunteered for active duty in the Korean War. Again. He was decorated and wounded. Receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was said to be fearless. And fierce in battle. He was known to the enemy. And believed by some Chinese soldiers to be a demon. Who could not be killed. I only knew him years later retired. Disabled. A gentle giant who loved home and family. And simple pleasures like a good cup of coffee or a good meal. He loved to visit friends and relatives. And was known by everyone in the community. At reunions of the vets of the 164th. Grown men would burst into tears upon seeing him. Telling his wife and family they would not be alive except for Woody. The safest place to be was right next to Woody's. It was an honor to have known him. True badass. My cousin Christopher was born with autism. Didn't speak a word till he was 6 years old. And was developmentally delayed all through his education. However, he has always been a kind soul. And most people recognize that in him. With a lot of support and life experience. He learned by brute force the social rules most of us are blessed to learn as children and teens only by experience. He went from not being able to talk to graduating high school at 20. And he now takes care of himself and also photographs weddings for money on the side. He's very talented. Most people who meet him can't even tell his condition because he is so talented with conversation. And if he slips up and says something awkward, he'll respond, "I'm very sorry. I have autism. Did I say something that made you uncomfortable?" Just an all-around genuine dude who was dealt a bad hand and made the most out of it. Love that guy. My grandmother. She fought cancer 6 different times over 17 years. Through it all, She took care of 5 grandchildren. Attended almost every game and graduation. Kept a beautifully tended garden. And kept the whole family together. But to me, the most baddest part of it all is in all that time she never once complained or showed fear. As her doctor told her liver was failing during her 6th fight, she looked at him and said, "Well, I'll just have to get better then." She is the inspiration for my life. And I hope I face the challenges in my life with half the courage she had. We lost her in January this year. I miss her every day. But I'm confident in saying I had the privilege to be raised by one of the strongest and most graceful women in history. A U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beanie who did 4 tours in Vietnam. He had command of an autonomous company of montagnards with whom he would infiltrate the northern places in Cambodia where they did assassinations. Blew up infrastructure and supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He even filed his teeth to sharp points in the fashion of the Montagnard warriors. He stepped on a mine and lost his leg above the knee. He was one of my patients. He wanted to go back to Vietnam. But because his leg was an AK, above knee, amputation, they refused him and forced him out of the army. Some of the stories he told were incredible. But he had all the chest salad and commendations to prove them. He was really kind of an unassuming guy and looked a little like Roy Clark from Hee Haw and was a really funny guy who laughed a lot. But he was also a stone cold killer. He liked coming up behind an enemy guard and slitting their throat and disappearing. He told us of one time he killed every guard around the perimeter of an NVA camp and watched them freak out when they found the bodies. He said he did the same thing at the same camp the following night. But almost got caught and barely escaped. He had a lot of stories. But he also had a couple of silver stars and a commendation medal along with statements from his commanders about his actions. I'll never forget that guy. 2 years ago a friend of mine named Beto did the most baddest thing that I have ever heard of. At least from the people I know. He was leaving a bar with his girlfriend and as they were walking out, he saw a group of 4 men jumping a smaller sized man. Never being one to back down from an unjust situation, he yelled at the 4 men to leave the guy alone. He had had enough. They turned on him and attacked my friend. He fought off the 4 guys until he tripped and fell. Where at that point 2 of the guys pulled out knives and stabbed my friend repeatedly. He tried to fight them off still. But when he knew he could no longer do so, he told them to stop stabbing him. They did not. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where he continued to fight for his life for 2 days, until he succumbed to his injuries. I have seen the guys that did this to my friend and 3 out of the 4 are fairly large individuals. I often think to myself, would I have done what was right in that moment? Would I have done what Beto did? More often than not. I can't see myself willingly defending someone I didn't know, knowing that there would be hell to pay. The stranger getting jumped would have been killed that night. But he was saved. He was saved by someone who throughout his life always fought for the underdog. He always fought against the unjust and did what he believed was right. Oddly enough, we all referred to him as badass when we were blessed with his short presence here on Earth. Rest in peace, Beto Badass. I never met my granddad, but he was pretty BA. He was a fighter pilot in World War II. He was shot down twice. The first time he made it back to the Allied side. The second time he was captured and his best friend wingman was executed in front of him. My uncle would later be named after his friend that was killed. When the POW camp that he was held at was liberated, they found him cutting up the chocolate bar the Germans would five to the officers. He was dividing up to give as many prisoners apiece as possible. After he was rescued he was sent home and the army dropped him off in New York. He went to his uncle's house, who he knew lived there prior to joining. When his uncle answered the door he had a heart attack because his family thought he had died. His uncle thought he was seeing a ghost. Luckily he survived. My grandfather born in 46. In 66 he dodged the draft by joining the airborne. In the war he was a mobile helicopter mechanic, meaning he was sent behind enemy line to fix a helicopter whenever it crashed or had issues. He also sighted in guns, explains why he's the best shot I know. He has a Purple Heart but he won't say what from. After the war he was a ranch hand in Montana. In 1980 he moved to Washington and built a log home by himself from the logs he cut. He then got into forestry and is one of the best foresters around. He's worked in Canada, New Zealand, Chile and half the states. At 72, he has survived 3 major heart attacks and cardiac arrests. And yet he still works full-time in the woods. Best story from him was when he stood off to a standing mother grizzly bear in Alaska. Edit. He also looks like a stereotypical older lumberjack. My second comment, but my grandmother is a fucking badass. After her husband turned into an abusive alcoholic and after protecting her family from him for almost 10 years she left him. Took all 3 of their kids. Went to college while supporting them. Got a degree and became a CPA. Broke into what was then an all-male industry. Became the first female partner of an accounting firm in Mobile. Now she is getting old but she refuses to quit. She won't retire and she won't stop being involved with the city because it means too much to her. Also WDE. I'm a painter and one of my clients is a self-made gazillionaire in commercial real estate. Awesome dude. Super humble. A real-life undercover boss. Honest to God, most people think Hassos either homeless or the janitor and he gets quite a kick out of being very secretive. Hassos in his late 70s and works harder than anyone I know. Anyhow, one of his tenants, a loudmouth car dealer who flaunts every dollar he has, tried in vain to look cool in front of one of his friends he was standing with. He told the landlord, "See, I know what, Bob, is I'm kinda tired of paying the rent to you every month. How about I just buy this building from youse without breaking stride?" Bob looks him square in the eyes and says, "Stau luck, sonny, I don't sell buildings. I buy them." This one is chalked up to the most baddest looking dude I've ever seen. During Army medic training school, 8 for the military people, we had international soldiers come and experience the course with us to bring back how we were training our medics to their home country. Joining us was a 6'4" German SGT Maj, a special forces medic who had been in the German special service for years. Sporting a full-length beard and always wore sunglasses. Like inside, outside, training events. Didn't matter, he had his shades on. One day, I managed to catch a glimpse of him without his shades on. He was talking to one of the platoon sergeants and took them off momentarily, to reveal a clearly visible scar of a gunshot wound to the face. And not only that, he was missing his eye. But instead of a fake eye with the pupil and whatnot, it was just a straight black prosthesis. Baddest man right there. In all honesty, my mom, she had to deal with so much shit while she and my dad were raising my brother and I, and she did a pretty damn fucking good job. She's had to deal with the depression that came after she accidentally killed someone in a car accident, my older sister and her drug problem, my uncle, her younger brother, who's lived with us for the majority of my life and could be a real piece of shit, trying to make ends meet after the recession hit and she lost her store, nearly losing our house a couple times, my brother's depression, and the absolute shitstorm that was me in elementary school when my ADHD meds were fucking with my emotions to the point that I threatened suicide. She had to deal with all that raising me. And I turned out pretty well. I think she qualifies. A farmer in my hometown. Being a World War II veteran already gives the guy's baddest rating a significant boost. But specifically, I remember he fell about 10 feet off a windmill that he was fixing and broke several ribs when he was in his late 70s. He was hospitalized and there was serious talk that this was probably it. He stood a good chance of getting pneumonia or another of the many complications that the elderly tend to get when hospitalized and dying from it. That never happened. And he got out of the hospital as soon as he could. His sons practically had to tie him down to keep him from going out and working until he had fully recovered. But as soon as the doctors said he was fully healed, he was back at it. He passed away a couple years back at around 92 or so years old, and was out farming every day until the last couple months of his life. A guy I met 20 years ago who ran an orphanage in East Ukraine. He had something inexpressible about him. The closest thing I think I've seen to a real-life Jesus Christ. He was a humble, fierce, gentle bear of a man. Bearded and stern but full of parental love. He was quiet. You could see his grief and burden for every messed up child he and his team tried to rescue from heroin and the sewers where they often hid. He had in his eyes such a look of long suffering, having seen too many kids die in horrible ways. He warned them starkly of the dangers. Perhaps the only person to show them any care. He gave them a safe place where they could always run to. Expended every ounce of energy to give them a home. He was a real present father to hundreds. I remember them crowding round him outside as he told stories and played football with them. The world had abandoned and forgotten them. And he thanklessly took on himself the pain of being their one and only real parent. He called it more worthy than anything else the world had to offer. Though I only spent time with him briefly. He'll always be a role model to me. A guy I used to work next to in one of those co-working spaces. Started out as a ranch hand. Jumped around for a little bit. Went to join the Peace Corps in Tanzania. Came back here and founded an e-commerce platform for East African farmers despite having almost no technical skills himself. Hired a programmer on extremely short notice so he would be eligible for an incubator program. Which his company got accepted into and got funding through. Company took off to the point where Obama mentioned it at a trade summit. Oh. And he plays in an indie band. Maybe not badass in the traditional sense. But badass in that Jesus managed to help a lot of people with what he had at his disposal. Overall a super charismatic guy as well. My mom. She battled and beat not only breast cancer twice. But then battled a super rare cancer called leiomyosarcoma. Beat it. Then it came back in 2016 and within 4 months she faded and died. This is even more amazing when you know that she gave birth to 8 giant Viking children. Then raised them basically on her own. As my dad was a career Navy guy. Mom turned packing up and moving into an art form. She was also the kindest person I have ever known. Never a bad word about anyone. I have said many times mom was an angel. But maybe superhero fits better. I miss you mama. Far and away it's my grandfather. Daddy Bill. Tough Irish guy who spent most of his retirement in his garden doing real hard work. He survived multiple cancer diagnoses, skin and colon. Had a bum ticker. And survived one of the worst work accidents I had ever heard of. He worked for a metal company. He was headed to lunch with a buddy. He was about 30 feet ahead of the guy who had stopped to talk to someone else. A crane was moving 2 tons of metal and it wasn't strapped properly. The steel fell and crushed my grandfather. He was trapped under the metal with his legs spread out and his chest on the floor. They thought for sure he was dead. He was med-flighted to a hospital which probably saved his life. The family was at the hospital to say their goodbyes. Pastor read him his last rites. And at some point after visitation a nurse came in to check on him. He scared the nurse when he opened his extremely bloodshot eyes. Nobody expected him to come to. She asked if she could get him anything. And without missing a beat, Daddy Bill said, "You can get me a Budweiser." He passed away about 6 years ago. And I still drink a Bud on his birthday with his favorite beer can grip that's in the shape of a busty server. My uncle. And no one I've met comes close. Growing up he was obsessive with Shotokan karate and would practice for hours. He became a black belt yada yada. At 19 he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, 1987, and was told by DRs that he likely wouldn't survive long. He battled and won that battle. Then proceeds to take a job working at a max security psych hospital where he worked till the early 2000s. He had 2 heart attacks and bypass done. Returning to work afterwards. His 3rd heart attack saw him lose all but 30% use of his lungs. In 2012 his twin sister committed suicide related to a stressful job and a heart condition. He's medically retired now and just turned 50 in August. He's been told he'd never make it to 30 much less 50. Even though it's a struggle for him he still gets out on the tennis court and can play a little. He also continues to spar and take lessons in karate and now MMA. He's the most stubborn person I know. But he's looked death in the face and given it the finger so many times. My mother. At 20 she left her parents' house in a small city to live in the Amazonian rainforest teaching to indigenous children. At 25 she had me. and raised me by herself. She had to put up with a lot of rubbish from her family because she was a single mother. At 41 she, again, become pregnant. Again a single mother. When she was 47, her mother got ill. She came to live with us. She took care of her mother for over 7 years. During this time, I got depression and tries to kill myself. Twice. And my mother was with me all the time. Always strong. Always loving me. At 50 she got sick. The same disease as my grandmother. ALS. She never complained. She was taking care of her mother and suffering the same illness. At 53 she was hospitalized. She had 3 cardiac arrests. She was in a coma. She needed hemodialysis. She never got back from the coma and in June 2015 she died. My mother was a fucking badass. When she died, every tribe in our state, they gathered to pray for her. My wife. She was in an absolutely horrid car crash back in 1999 with a drunk driver that resulted in her getting crushed from the waist down and getting her left foot severed. Doctors didn't think she would make it, but she proved them wrong. After her wreck she went through 13 reconstructive surgeries on her foot alone, and multiple additional surgeries to have her legs and pelvis fixed. She was only 10 when this happened, was told she would never be able to walk again, and had to stay in a full body cast for almost a year. After getting out of the body cast, she started her physical therapy where she once again proved the doctors wrong by relearning how to walk. She goes every day putting up with people staring at her because of the way her left leg turns in at the knee. Courtesy of the surgeon putting in the bar and pins in wrong when she had those surgeries. Every day people give her weird looks and ask questions or make comments to her because of what happened. Yet she still manages to have a smile and treat everyone so nicely. She is so kind despite what she has been through and put up with. She carried our son for 39 out of 40 weeks knowing that if I were to have entered the birth canal, he would have shattered her pelvis, metal plates holding her pelvis together from her wreck, and worked full time up until 2 days before his birth. She's a badass mother and stepmom. A badass wife. And just a badass in general. She is strong for me and our children in every way I could imagine. And I thank God every day for putting her into mine and my daughter's lives. That is why the most badass person I've ever met is my wife. She is my Wonder Woman. My friend's grandfather. He was part of the Jewish resistance in Germany during World War II. He was sent to Auschwitz and escaped. He was sent a second time. Killed a German guard. Stole his gun and uniform. Killed several more and escaped a second time with weapons and ammo. He brought those to the resistance and he fought with them until the end of the war. He came to America after and helped build bridges. He died at 90 years old after beating cancer at 70. The guy was super nice. He ate meat and potatoes, drank bourbon and smoked cigars till the end. When my buddy was a teenager, he gave him the watch and knife of the guard he killed. He still wears the watch. My ex. By far the most badass person I've ever met. She grew up in a narcissistic household, being mentally abused. She was doing online school, but falling behind and failing her classes. Eventually she had enough and moved out at 17. Went back to public school. In said public school in the first couple months there she was raped by a senior, that of whom got off scot-free and was allowed to graduate. After that she managed to, from what she has told me, managed to emotionally recover to a functional level. Excel at her schoolwork. Volunteer firefighting. Take driving lessons. Work a part-time job. Take EMT courses. And get accepted into the National Guard all at the same time. School during day. Then work. Driving classes. Then at night EMT training. Absolutely insane. She broke up with me due to her having so much stress and chaos in her life before she started public school again. So it has become ever more chaotic and stressful since then. I completely understand. And I'm extremely proud of how she is able to turn her life around and do so much after coming from such a horrible place. I wish her the best of luck and hope she is and always will be happy. I know a guy who was an off-duty police officer at the time and was driving home one night only to drive his car off a 20-foot bridge. Construction company was repairing it and nobody bothered to put up any signage. Anyways, guy walked 5 kilometers to the police station and had a friend drive him to the hospital where he was told he was fine. Skip forward a few days and he was having headaches and in a lot of pain, so he went to a different hospital. Turns out he had a cracked skull and 3 broken vertebrae. If he coughed too hard it could have killed him. Sued the construction company and the hospital for malpractice and ended up winning after about a 10-year legal battle. My parents. My mom is a doctor for premature babies and puts on the bravest face for work every single day. She works tirelessly for Christmas, New Year's Eve, and other holidays and sacrifices being with her family to save someone else's sauce. She came to the US and did not give up despite failures and still killed the USMLE exams like a badass. She takes care of me and takes me shopping and out for food even when she has worked 24-hour shifts because she wants to spend quality time with her daughter. When I told my mom I was sexually assaulted, she put on a face of stone and never broke down for me. And made me get up, shower, change, and get help. If I can be half the mom she is, I'll be okay with that. Also, my dad. He came to the US from a small village in a developing country and escaped his abusive parents and even did some college in communist Russia, where he had to wait in long lines to get food in exchange for ration cards only for it to be his turn and be told there was no more food remaining. And paid for college in the US himself by working at gas stations, Subway, and laundromats. Meanwhile, I can hardly do college while focusing on only academics. He took care of me, his daughter, and did my hair before school and chose my outfits and did the whole bake sale and project thing when my mom was busy finishing up her residency program. He said we saw a family of honey badgers because we are fierce and nothing can bring us down. IDK, he watched a documentary on them once. God, I love my parents. My dad accidentally shot himself. My dad shot at steel for a target showing off his new rifle while his mates hid and said how shit of an idea it was. It bounced off and hit him in the stomach. He didn't want to scare my mum who was 3 months pregnant with me and he can't stand going to the doctor's hospital, so he just went back to his mate's place, took out some Dettol and tweezers, pulled it out, had a go at stitching, then bandaged his waist. Later that night mum's woken up in a bed covered in blood thinking she's just miscarried. She screams waking up my dad saying she thinks she lost the baby and my dad said nah, it's all good, I just accidentally shot myself. She forced him to the hospital.